The drawing-room of Ashworth House had all the warmth of a marble tomb. Rows of gilded chairs stood upon a floor polished to a mirror shine, and the portraits of 9 generations of Dukes of Ravenmore stared down with identical expressions of aristocratic disdain. Lady Beatrice Ashworth, the Duke's aunt, sat nearest the fire, her silk gown the color of dried blood, her spine rigid as a blade. The Duke himself stood before the hearth. Alexander Henry Charles Ashworth, 9th Duke of Ravenmore, was a man carved from shadow and stone. His tailored black coat fit his broad shoulders without a single crease, and his cravat was tied with mathematical precision. He was 30 years of age, handsome in a severe manner, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the color of winter slate. He had never been known to raise his voice. He had never needed to. "You have called us here, Alexander," Lady Beatrice said, her tone carefully clipped. "One assumes it is a matter of consequence. The season is upon us, and I have not the leisure for theatrical delays." Her son, Mr. Percival Ashworth, lounged in a chair near the window, a faint smile playing upon his lips. He was 5 years younger than the Duke, fair-haired, pretty, and entirely useless. Beside him sat Lady Honoria Vane, the daughter of the Earl of Pemberton, who had been placed in the Duke's orbit since her debut with the precision of a military campaign. She was beautiful in the manner of a painted doll, her golden curls arranged to perfection, her blue eyes watching Alexander with a mixture of expectation and ownership. "It concerns my marriage," Alexander said. The room shifted. Lady Honoria's cheeks flushed a delicate pink. Lady Beatrice allowed herself a thin smile. Percival raised an eyebrow. "At last," Lady Beatrice said. "We had begun to fear you intended to let the line wither. I trust the announcement is not premature." She glanced pointedly at Lady Honoria. "It is not premature," Alexander said. He withdrew a letter from his coat and laid it upon the table. The paper was plain, the seal a simple circle of wax. "I have chosen a bride." Lady Honoria's smile widened. She smoothed her skirts and waited. "Her name is Miss Eleanor Hartwell," Alexander continued. "She is 22 years of age. She resides presently at St. Agatha's Orphanage in Cheapside." The room went so still that the crackle of the fire sounded like a shot. Percival recovered first. He laughed, a bright, cruel sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "Good Lord, Alexander, you have developed a sense of humor. An orphan from Cheapside. Do tell us the punchline." Lady Beatrice did not laugh. Her face had gone white around the mouth. "This is an outrage," she said. "You are the Duke of Ravenmore. You cannot mean to drag a nameless, penniless creature into this house and call her your Duchess." "I mean precisely that," Alexander said. Lady Honoria's voice was thin. "You cannot be serious, Your Grace. My father has given every indication that an understanding exists between our families. I have waited 2 seasons. Alexander turned his cold gaze upon her. "You waited by your own choice, Lady Honoria. I made no promise to you or to your father. I have made my choice." Percival leaned forward. "And what, pray, is so remarkable about this charity case? Does she possess a hidden fortune, a face that could launch a fleet?" "She possesses a mind," Alexander said, "and a character that has not been corroded by idleness and inheritance." The insult landed with deadly precision. Percival's smile vanished. Lady Beatrice rose to her feet, trembling. "You will not bring that woman into this house," she said. "Think of the scandal, think of the name you bear." "I think of little else," Alexander said. "The wedding will take place in 3 weeks at the chapel on the estate. You may attend or not, as your sensibilities dictate." He turned and walked from the room, leaving behind a silence so thick it seemed to swallow the firelight. In the doorway, a footman stood frozen, his face carefully blank. Behind him, the long shadow of the Duke fell across the marble floor like a blade. Eleanor Hartwell had known hunger, cold, and the back-breaking labor of a laundry house. She had known the particular loneliness of a child who watches other children leave with families while she remains behind. At 22, she had accepted that her life would be one of honest work and quiet obscurity. She earned her bread by teaching the orphanage children their letters and by mending linens for the parish church. She asked for nothing and expected less. When the carriage arrived at St. Agatha, she was on her knees scrubbing the front step. The carriage was black, polished to a gleam, and emblazoned with a crest she did not recognize. A footman in silver livery stepped down and asked for Miss Hartwell with a formality that seemed absurd against the backdrop of the muddy street. Eleanor stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "I am Eleanor Hartwell." A man emerged from the carriage then. He was tall, dressed in dark blue and silver, with eyes that seemed to strip away every pretense. He was the handsomest man she had ever seen, and the most terrifying. "Miss Hartwell," he said. His voice was low and even. "I am Alexander Ashworth, Duke of Ravenmore. I have a matter of considerable importance to discuss with you." Eleanor stared at him. A duke here, at an orphanage, asking for her by name. "Your Grace," she said, and managed a curtsy despite the state of her dress. "I fear there has been some mistake." "There has been no mistake," he said. "I have come to offer you marriage." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt the world tilt. She heard the children shouting in the yard behind the building, the clatter of a cart on the cobblestones, the distant cry of a fishmonger. The world continued its ordinary business while hers fractured and reformed into something unrecognizable. "Marriage," she repeated. "To a duke you wish to marry me." "I do not jest, Miss Hartwell. I am in need of a wife of sound character. I have made inquiries. They have led me to you." Eleanor's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You do not know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know that you teach children without payment. I know that you gave your winter cloak to a woman who had none. I know that you have refused every offer of advancement that required you to compromise your principles. I have come to ask if you will marry me. I will not force you. The choice is yours." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch. He was not mocking her. He was not mad. Beneath the cold surface of his face, she glimpsed something raw and unguarded, a man carrying a burden he would not name. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have any woman in England." "I do not want any woman in England," he said. "I want a partner, a woman of courage and decency. I believe you are that woman." Eleanor felt tears press against her eyes and willed them back. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. "If I refuse," she said, "what becomes of you?" "I will remain unmarried," he said simply. She studied him. He stood in the muddy street as if it were a ballroom, his bearing unbroken, his gaze steady. And yet she sensed a quiet desperation in him, a man who had come to the last door and did not know what lay beyond it. "I will marry you," she said. The words left her mouth before she could call them back. For a moment, something shifted in his face. Surprise, perhaps, relief. Then the mask returned. "Then we shall begin," he said. He extended his hand. Eleanor took it. His grip was warm and solid, and she felt the first stirring of a future she had never dared to imagine. She did not know that in a drawing room across the city, Lady Beatrice Ashworth was already composing the letter that would poison every drawing room in London against her. She did not know that Percival had begun to drink and to talk. She did not know that Lady Honoria had wept into her pillow, and then gone to her father with a face set in lines of cold resolve. She only knew that a duke had chosen her, an orphan from Cheapside, and that the world was about to change. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of silk and whispers. Eleanor was removed from St. Agatha and installed in a private suite at Ravenmore House, the Duke's London residence, a vast edifice of pale stone overlooking Hyde Park. Servants appeared to attend her every need, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor ate from plates of fine china and slept upon sheets of linen so smooth they felt like water. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thatch, was a woman of middle years with a face like a closed fist. She regarded Alina with suspicion and measured her words as if each one cost money. The lady's maid assigned to her, a quiet girl named Rose, was the only person who smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Her ladyship arrives at noon," Rose said one morning as she pinned Alina's hair. "The Duke's aunt, I mean. She has requested a private meeting with you." Alina's stomach tightened. "Requested." "Commanded more like," Rose said under her breath. "But the Duke is not in the house. He is at the estate seeing to the chapel. She knows that." Alina looked at her reflection. The dress she wore was a gift from the Duke, deep green with a modest neckline, far finer than anything she had ever owned. She barely recognized herself. The girl in the mirror looked like a lady, but beneath the silk, her heart beat with the same old fear. Lady Beatrice arrived with the punctuality of a tax collector. She swept into the small drawing room where Alina waited, her eyes sweeping over the room as if assessing its contents for resale. She did not sit. "Miss Hartwell," she said, "I will not waste pleasantries. You have somehow ensnared my nephew. I intend to discover how." Alina kept her voice steady. "His Grace made an offer of marriage. I accepted. There is no snare, Lady Beatrice. I am as surprised as you are." "Do not take me for a fool," Lady Beatrice said. "Women of your station have but one currency. I wish to know what you offered him that he could not find among his own class." The insult was clear. Alina felt heat rise to her face but forced herself to remain still. "I offered nothing but my word," she said. "I have no fortune, no connections, and no family. If the Duke married for advantage, he made a poor bargain indeed." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "You admit yourself unsuitable." "I admit nothing of the kind," Alina said. "I am poor. That is not the same as unsuitable. I do not know why the Duke chose me. I only know that I intend to honor my vows and serve his household as best I can." For a long moment the older woman studied her. Then she laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You think virtue will protect you. It will not. This world will chew you to the bone. When it does, do not come weeping to me." She turned and left without another word. Alina stood in the silence, her hands trembling, and forced herself to breathe. The Duke returned that evening. He found Alina in the library, a book open on her lap, though she had read the same page 3 times without comprehension. He stood in the doorway, his coat thrown over one arm, his face shadowed with fatigue. "I am told my aunt visited you," he said. "She did." He crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite her. "I should have warned you. Lady Beatrice is not a woman who accepts defeat gracefully. She will try to wound you. She will try to drive you away." "I have heard worse," Alina said. "Far worse, Your Grace. A woman who mends laundry hears every insult the world possesses." His mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You are not what they expected." "Is that why you chose me?" The question escaped her before she could stop it. "Because I would shock them." Alexander was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled between them. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I chose you because I needed someone I could trust," he said. "Someone who would not see me as a title and a fortune. I am surrounded by people who want something from me. My land, my power, my name. I needed a wife who wanted none of those things." Alina's heart ached at the admission. "How do you know I want none of them?" "Because you tried to refuse," he said. "And because you have spent your life serving others while asking nothing for yourself. That is rare. It is precious." The word hung in the air between them, warm and dangerous. Alina looked away. "I am not a saint, Your Grace. I have wants." "What do you want, Alina?" The sound of her name in his mouth sent a shiver through her. No one had ever spoken it that way, as if it were something valuable. "I want a matter," she said, "to someone. I want a home that cannot be taken from me. I want to know that when I am gone, something of me remains." Alexander leaned forward. "Then we understand each other," he said. "I want the same. I want a legacy that is not built on lies and old sins. I want a marriage that is honest. I want a partner who will stand beside me when the wolves come, and they will come, Eleanor. They are already circling. She met his eyes. Then I will stand. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was gentle, astonishingly so for a man of his size and bearing. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The contact was brief, but it left a burning mark. The next morning, Eleanor found a letter waiting on her breakfast tray. It was addressed in an elegant hand, sealed with wax the color of blood. She opened it and read, "Dear Miss Hartwell, I do not know you, but I know enough. You are an orphan of no name and no fortune, a creature who has no business among persons of quality. The Duke has made a fool of himself and of his family. You may think yourself fortunate, but understand this. The family will never accept you. You will be despised, mocked, and isolated. If you possess any decency, you will release his grace from this mad engagement before it destroys him. A friend of the family." Eleanor read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it aside. Her hands did not shake. She had expected something of the kind. She had not expected the last line, which lingered in her mind like a splinter. "Before it destroys him." The wedding was 3 weeks away. The dress was being made. The chapel was being prepared. The banns had been read. And somewhere in the city, a war was being waged against her with ink and whispers. Eleanor rose from the table and went to the window. The street below was crowded with carriages and pedestrians, the great machine of London grinding on. Somewhere out there, Alexander was fighting his own battles. She would not add to them. She would not break. She would not run. She had never been given anything in her life. Now she had been given a chance, and she would hold to it with everything she possessed. But as she stood there, a thought crept in, unwelcome and cold. What if the letter was right? What if her presence truly would destroy him? She pushed the thought away. She had made a promise. She intended to keep it. The chapel at Ravenmore Hall was small and ancient, its stone walls covered in ivy that had grown for centuries. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and damp, and a fine mist hung over the estate like a veil. Eleanor stood in the vestibule, her heart pounding against her ribs, her fingers cold despite the gloves that encased them. The dress was white silk, simple and elegant, with a lace veil that had belonged to Alexander's mother. It was the only kindness the family had extended, and Eleanor suspected it had been done reluctantly. She wore no jewels. She needed none. Rose adjusted the veil and smiled at her with tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful, Miss Eleanor, truly." Eleanor tried to smile back. "I feel as if I am walking to the gallows." "Then you must be the loveliest prisoner in England," Rose said. The chapel was nearly empty. Alexander's family had refused to attend, with the exception of a distant cousin who came only to observe and report back. A handful of servants filled the back pews, their faces a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. The rector, a nervous man with trembling hands, waited at the altar. Alexander stood before him, tall and still, his face unreadable. He wore black as he always did, but his cravat was white as fresh snow. He did not smile as Eleanor approached, but his eyes never left her, and in their depths she saw something that steadied her. The ceremony was brief. Vows were spoken. Rings were exchanged. The rector pronounced them man and wife, and Alexander lifted her veil. His lips brushed her forehead, soft as a promise. "It is done," he said quietly. They walked from the chapel into the gray morning, and Eleanor Ashworth, Duchess of Ravenmore, stepped into a world that was already sharpening its knives. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall, a cavernous room hung with banners and portraits. The family had made a show of attending, perhaps because they feared the scandal of absence more than the scandal of presence. Lady Beatrice sat at the head of the table, her face a mask of frozen civility. Percival drank steadily, his eyes bright with malice. Lady Honoria was present as well, seated beside her father, the Earl of Pemberton, whose expression was that of a man who had been cheated at cards. The Earl rose to offer a toast. He was a heavy man with a red face and small, calculating eyes. "To the happy couple," he said, lifting his glass. "May the Duke soon discover the wisdom of his choice, and may his bride prove worthy of the name she has taken." The words were correct, but the tone was acid. A few guests murmured. Elinor felt the weight of every gaze upon her, measuring, judging, condemning. She lifted her own glass. "I thank the Earl for his kind wishes," she said. Her voice was clear and steady. "I am aware that my presence here is unexpected. I am aware that many of you doubt the wisdom of this union. But I have taken a vow before God to honor and support my husband. I intend to keep it. I will not be driven from this house by whispers or cold shoulders. I have survived far worse than a hostile dining room." A silence fell. Lady Beatrice's face hardened. Percival's smile slipped. The Earl sat down heavily, his face reddening further. Alexander looked at Elinor with something like pride. The meal proceeded in strained silence. Elinor tasted nothing. Her stomach was knotted with tension, but her spine remained straight. She would not show weakness. Not here. Not now. Afterward, as the guests drifted away, Lady Honoria approached Elinor in the corridor outside the great hall. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands clasped tightly before her. "You think you have won," she said, "but I will not disappear. I have known Alexander since we were children. I know his nature, his burdens, his secrets. You know nothing of him. You are a stranger in a borrowed dress." Elinor met her gaze. "Then I will learn," she said, "and you will learn to accept what cannot be changed." Lady Honoria's face twisted. "He will tire of you. Men of his class always do. When he does, I will be waiting." She turned and walked away, her skirts whispering against the stone floor. Elinor stood alone in the corridor, the cold seeping through the walls. She had won a battle, but the war was far from over. That night she prepared for bed in the Duchess's chambers, a vast room hung with tapestries and dominated by a great carved bed. Rose helped her undress and brushed her hair until it fell in dark waves down her back. "The Duke has sent word that he will visit you shortly," Rose said. Elinor's heart lurched. She knew what was expected of her. She was a wife now. The marriage had not been consummated. The thought filled her with a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. Alexander arrived an hour later. He knocked softly at the connecting door and Elinor opened it. He stood in his dressing gown, his cravat removed, his dark hair slightly disheveled. He looked less like a duke and more like a man. "I will not pretend this is not awkward," he said. "I did not marry you to demand your body, but the marriage must be legal and the law requires consummation." Elinor swallowed. "I understand." "Do you?" He stepped closer. "I am not a monster, Elinor. If you are afraid, I will leave. We can wait." She shook her head. "I am not afraid." He searched her face. "You tremble." "I tremble because I have never been alone with a man," she said. "Not because I do not trust you." Something softened in his eyes. He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers warm against her skin. "I will be gentle," he said. He was. He extinguished the candles one by one until only the firelight remained, painting the room in gold. He took her hand and led her to the bed. He kissed her slowly, giving her time to learn the shape of him. And when he joined his body to hers, he held her as if she were something precious, something that might break. Elinor did not break. She held to him, her fingers tangled in his hair, her breath coming in soft gasps. She had expected pain, but found only a strange, spreading warmth that built until it left her breathless. Afterward they lay side by side in the darkness. Alexander's hand found hers beneath the sheets. "You surprised me today," he said. "At the breakfast." "Yes, you stood before them without flinching. You spoke with a dignity they could not match." "They will never accept me," she said quietly. "Then they will lose," Alexander said. "You are my wife now, not a guest to be dismissed, not a scandal to be managed, my wife." She turned toward him. "And what am I to you truly? A partner, a shield, a means to an end. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I do not know yet. I know only that you are not what I expected and that I am glad of it." It was not a declaration of love. It was not even close. But it was honest, and in that honesty, Alina found a small measure of peace. She closed her eyes and slept, and for the first time in her life, she dreamed not of loss but of beginning. In the corridor outside, a figure moved silently through the shadows. Percival Ashworth pressed his ear to the door, his face a mask of contempt. He had heard enough. He turned and walked away, already shaping the story he would tell. The first month of Alina's marriage was a trial by ice. The household ran with mechanical precision, and she was given no real authority. Mrs. Thatch deferred to her in public but reported to Lady Beatrice in private. The servants who had smiled at first grew wary, fearing reprisals. Alina moved through the great house like a ghost, present but unseen. Alexander was often away, attending to estate business or parliament or the endless demands of his title. When he returned, he was tired and distant, though always kind. They shared meals and occasional conversations, but the intimacy of their wedding night was not repeated. Alina told herself it did not matter. She had not married for love, but the loneliness was a cold ache that settled in her bones. One afternoon, a visitor arrived at Ravenmore House. Alina was in the small sitting room that had been assigned to her, a room that had once belonged to Alexander's mother. The woman was announced as Mrs. Penelope Cross, a widow of good family who had known the late Duchess. Mrs. Cross was small and sharp-eyed, with silver hair and a warm smile. She embraced Alina as if they were old friends. "I have been eager to meet you," she said. "I was the late Duchess's closest companion. Alexander wrote to me of his marriage. I came as soon as I could." Alina liked her immediately. "You are the first person who has seemed pleased to meet me." "That is because I am not foolish," Mrs. Cross said. "I knew Alexander's mother. She was a woman of extraordinary character, and she suffered greatly in this family. I see the same strength in you." They sat by the fire, and Mrs. Cross spoke of the late Duchess. Her name had been Margaret, and she had been the daughter of a minor baronet, beautiful and gentle and utterly unprepared for the cruelty of the Ashworth family. Lady Beatrice was jealous of her, Mrs. Cross said. She had expected to rule this house through her brother, the old Duke, but he married Margaret and Margaret would not be ruled. So Lady Beatrice made her life a misery. "What happened to her?" Alina asked. Mrs. Cross's face darkened. "She died when Alexander was 12 years old. The official cause was fever, but I have always suspected something more." Alina felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Margaret was healthy and strong. She fell ill after drinking a cup of tea prepared by Lady Beatrice's own maid. Within a week, she was dead. The old Duke was heartbroken and died soon after. Alexander became Duke at 13, with Lady Beatrice as his guardian." The room seemed to tilt. Alina gripped the arms of her chair. "You believe Lady Beatrice murdered his mother?" "I believe it is possible," Mrs. Cross said quietly. "I have no proof, but Alexander has never trusted his aunt. He believes she poisoned his mother. It is why he has kept her at a distance, why he refused to marry any of the women she put before him." Alina's mind raced. She thought of Alexander's coldness, his guarded eyes, his need for a wife he could trust. Now it made sense. He was surrounded by enemies, and he had chosen her because she was outside the web of old allegiances and old sins. "Why are you telling me this?" Alina asked. "Because you are his wife," Mrs. Cross said, "and because you deserve to know what you have walked into. This family is not merely hostile, it is dangerous. Watch yourself. Watch your food and your drink. Trust no one except Alexander and Rose." Alina nodded slowly. "I will." That night she confronted Alexander in his study. He stood by the window, a glass of brandy in his hand, his face half in shadow. "I spoke with Mrs. Cross today," Alina said. "She told me about your mother. Alexander's hand tightened on the glass. She had no right. She had every right. I am your wife. I should know the truth. He turned to face her. The truth is that my mother died, and I could do nothing to save her. The truth is that my family is rotten to the core, and I have spent my life trying to protect what remains of my name from their poison. Is that what you wish to hear? Elinor took a step toward him. I wish to hear that you trust me enough to tell me yourself. The words seemed to strike him. He set down the glass and passed a hand over his face. I do trust you, he said. That is why I chose you, but some truths are too ugly to share. I have lived with ugliness all my life, she said. I am not afraid. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and took her face in his hands. You should be, he said. My aunt is a woman who will stop at nothing to preserve her power. If she believes you are a threat, she will move against you. I married you knowing this. I put you in harm's way. Do you understand what that means? Elinor met his eyes. It means you needed me. It means I am not a guest in this house. I am a combatant. A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh. You are remarkable. I am your wife, she said, and I will not be chased away. He kissed her then, not gently but with a fierce, desperate hunger. Elinor responded in kind, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart pounding. The kiss deepened, and for a moment all the coldness between them melted away. The door opened. Percival stood in the doorway, his eyes widening with theatrical surprise. Forgive me, he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. I did not realize your grace was occupied. I came to discuss the estate accounts. Alexander released Elinor slowly. His face was once again a mask. The accounts can wait, Percival. Percival lingered, his gaze crawling over Elinor. I am certain they can. I would not dream of interrupting such a tender scene. He turned to go, then paused. By the by, Elinor, you should know that the family has begun to speak of you in the clubs. They call you the Rag Duchess. It has a certain ring, do you not think? Elinor felt the blood rise to her face, but she kept her voice steady. They may call me what they wish. It does not change what I am. Percival smiled. What are you precisely? A clever orphan who married above her station, a pawn in a game you do not understand, or something more? He left before she could answer. The door closed softly behind him. Alexander stood rigid, his hands clenched. I will deal with him. No, Elinor said. I will deal with him. He wants to wound me. I will not give him the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. Alexander looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a flicker of admiration. Be careful, Elinor. He is more dangerous than he seems. She nodded, but as she left the study, she understood that the war had only begun. And she intended to win. The ball at Pemberton House was the first great social test of Elinor's marriage. The Earl of Pemberton, still smarting from the collapse of his daughter's ambitions, had extended the invitation with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Alexander could not refuse without giving offense. Elinor understood that she would be walking into a lion's den. She dressed with care. The gown was midnight blue, the color of a winter sky, and Rose had woven pearls into her hair. Elinor looked at her reflection and saw a woman she barely recognized. The orphan of Cheapside had been replaced by a duchess. But the orphan was still there, beneath the silk, her heart beating with the old familiar fear. The ballroom was a blaze of candlelight and jewels. Hundreds of guests filled the floor, their voices rising in a steady hum. When Alexander and Elinor were announced, the hum faltered. Heads turned. Fans were raised. Whispers began. Elinor lifted her chin and walked at Alexander's side, her hand on his arm. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, the prickle of open hostility, but she did not stumble. Lady Beatrice was the first to greet them. She was dressed in black silk, a walking monument to disapproval. You are late, she said. The Earl has been asking for you. We are precisely on time, Alexander said. Lady Beatrice's gaze slid to Elinor. How charming you look, my dear. Blue suits you. It is the color of the sky before a storm. I have always preferred the calm after, Elinor said. The older woman's smile was thin. We shall see. The evening proceeded as Elinor had expected. The men looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The women cut her with their fans and their silences. Only a few were openly rude, but the message was clear. She was not welcome. Lady Honoria was the exception. She approached Elinor with every appearance of warmth, her golden beauty undimmed by her disappointment. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying, "I am so pleased you could come. I feared you would find our little gathering too provincial after the splendors of Cheapside." The insult was delivered with a smile. Elinor smiled back. "Not at all, Lady Honoria. I find London society quite charming. It reminds me of the orphanage in many ways." Lady Honoria's smile flickered. "How so?" "Everyone is competing for the same scraps of attention, and the weaker children are pushed aside. But I suspect you would know more of that than I." For a moment Lady Honoria's face went white. Then she laughed, a brittle sound. "You have a sharp tongue, Duchess. I wonder if His Grace finds it attractive." "I find her honesty refreshing," Alexander said, appearing at Elinor's side. "It is a quality rarely found in ballrooms." Lady Honoria curtsied again. "Of course, if you will excuse me, I must greet the other guests." She moved away, her back rigid. Alexander looked at Elinor. "You handled her well. She is not subtle." "She is not the one to fear," Alexander said quietly. "Her father is here, so is Percival. They are watching." Elinor glanced across the room. The Earl stood near the punch table, his small eyes fixed on her. Percival lounged beside him, a glass in his hand. They were smiling. A cold finger traced her spine. The dance began. Elinor danced with Alexander, her skirts swirling, his hand steady at her waist. For a few precious moments the world fell away. She looked into his eyes and saw something there that made her pulse quicken. Not love, perhaps, but something close. Something that might in time become love. Then the music ended, and the nightmare began. A man stepped forward as Alexander was called away by a political associate. He was young, handsome, and reeking of wine. His name was Lord Charles Everleigh, and his reputation preceded him. "The Rag Duchess," he said loudly. "I have heard so much about you. Tell me, is it true that His Grace found you scrubbing a doorstep?" The conversations nearby faltered. Faces turned. Elinor felt the heat of humiliation rising, but she kept her voice calm. "I was not scrubbing a doorstep, Lord Everleigh. I was maintaining the entrance of the orphanage where I worked. There is no shame in honest labor." "No shame?" Lord Everleigh laughed. "Perhaps not for a servant, but for a duchess. It is the stuff of farce. I wonder how long before His Grace tires of the novelty and sends you back to your mop." A woman laughed, then another. The sound spread, a wave of cruel amusement. Elinor stood still, her heart pounding. She could feel the walls of the ballroom closing in, the weight of every sneer and whispered word. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But she did not. "You mistake novelty for character, my lord," she said. "His Grace married me because I possess something this room lacks: integrity. I will not be shamed by a man who has never done an honest day's work in his life." The laughter died. Lord Everleigh's face reddened. He took a step toward her, his hands clenched. "You dare insult me." "I dare speak the truth," Elinor said. "And I will continue to do so, no matter how many drunkards and gossips try to silence me." The silence that followed was absolute. Then a voice cut through it. "Lord Everleigh, you will apologize to my wife." Alexander stood at the edge of the circle, his face pale with fury. He moved through the crowd like a blade through silk, his eyes never leaving Lord Everleigh. Everleigh's bravado crumbled. "Your Grace, I merely—" "You will apologize," Alexander repeated. "Now." The word hung in the air, heavy as a blow. Lord Everlie swallowed hard. "I apologize," he said hoarsely. "I spoke out of turn." Alexander turned to the crowd. "Let this be the last time anyone in this room speaks of my wife with anything less than the respect due to the Duchess of Ravenmore. I will not tolerate it. I will not forgive it. And I will not forget it." The room was silent. Then Alexander took Eleanor's arm and led her from the floor. They did not speak until they were in the carriage. Eleanor was trembling, her hands shaking in her lap. Alexander sat across from her, his face half in shadow. "I should not have left you alone," he said. "You cannot protect me every moment," she said. "I knew what I was walking into." "Knowing does not make it bearable." "No," she admitted, "but I will bear it anyway." He leaned forward and took her hands. "They will not break you, Eleanor. I will not allow it." She looked at him, and in the dim light of the carriage, she saw something in his face that made her breath catch. It was not merely protectiveness. It was something deeper, something that had been growing in the space between them. "Why do you care?" she asked. "I am a weapon you chose, a means to an end. Why do you care what happens to me?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you are more than that. You have become more than that." The words were simple, but they opened a door. Eleanor leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claim, a declaration, a demand. Alexander responded with equal intensity, his hands tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I will not let them destroy us," Alexander said. "Us," Eleanor repeated. It was the first time he had used that word. The carriage rolled on through the dark streets, carrying them toward whatever came next. The attack came 3 weeks later. Eleanor was walking in the garden at Ravenmore Hall, Rose trailing a respectful distance behind. It was late afternoon, and the light was beginning to fade. The air smelled of damp earth and dying leaves. The man emerged from behind the hedge without warning. He was rough and broad, dressed in laborer's clothes, and he held a club in one hand. His face was twisted with intent. Eleanor did not scream. The scream lodged in her throat, trapped by shock. Rose screamed for her, a high, piercing sound that echoed across the garden. The man lunged. Eleanor threw herself to the side, her skirts tangling around her legs. The club swung past her head, close enough to stir her hair. She stumbled, fell, and scrambled backward across the wet grass. "Hold still, you little," the man snarled. Then another figure appeared. Alexander came from the direction of the house, running faster than Eleanor had ever seen him move. He was not carrying a weapon. He did not need one. He struck the man once, a blow to the jaw that sent him sprawling. The club flew from his hand and landed in the grass. Alexander stood over him, breathing hard, his face murderous. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man spat blood. "No one." Alexander seized him by the collar and hauled him to his feet. "I will ask once more, who sent you?" The man laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "You think I'll talk? You're a dead man, Ashworth. You and your little orphan bride both." Alexander's fist connected again. The man's head snapped back and he went limp. Servants appeared, summoned by Rose's scream. Alexander ordered the man bound and locked in the cellar. Then he turned to Eleanor, who still sat on the grass, trembling. He knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. The terror was only now beginning to loosen its grip. She had nearly died. A stranger had tried to kill her in her own garden. Alexander helped her to her feet and held her close. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek. "This is my fault," he said. "I brought you into this. I put you in danger." "No," she managed. "I chose this. I chose you." He pulled back and looked into her face. "I will find out who did this. I will make them pay." That night the household was in an uproar. The man was questioned by the magistrate, but he refused to name his employer. He was a hired brute, a man with no loyalties and no fear. He was taken to the local jail where he would wait for trial. Alexander convened a meeting in his study. Lady Beatrice sat stiffly in a chair, her face unreadable. Percival stood by the fire, his expression one of exaggerated concern. Mrs. Cross was also present, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Someone hired that man to kill Eleanor," Alexander said. "I want to know who." "I cannot imagine," Lady Beatrice said, "though it is hardly surprising, given the scandal you have invited into this house." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You will watch your tongue." "I will not," Lady Beatrice said. "This marriage was a mistake from the beginning. You have brought shame upon this family, and now you have brought danger. That creature in the garden is merely the first. Others will follow. You should send the girl away before more blood is spilled." Eleanor, who had been sitting in the corner, rose to her feet. "I am not a girl, and I am not leaving." Lady Beatrice sneered. "You would see this family destroyed to satisfy your ambition." "My ambition?" Eleanor's voice shook with anger. "I had no ambition. I had a life of honest work and quiet obscurity. Your nephew came to me and offered me a future. I accepted. If I am in danger, it is because someone in this room wishes me harm." The words fell like stones into still water. Percival smiled faintly. "A bold accusation," he said. "Do you have proof?" "I do not need proof," Eleanor said. "I know what I know, and I know that you have hated me from the first moment you saw me. You and your mother and Lady Honoria. You want me gone. You want Alexander to fail." Percival's smile faded. "Be careful, Eleanor. Words have consequences." "So do actions," she shot back. "A man tried to kill me today. Do not speak to me of consequences." The room was silent. Then Alexander spoke. "Enough. Eleanor, sit down. Percival, leave this room. Aunt, you will remain, but you will not speak unless I ask you to." Percival's face flushed, but he obeyed. Lady Beatrice pressed her lips together, her eyes blazing. When Percival was gone, Alexander turned to his aunt. "I will ask you once," he said. "Did you have any part in this?" Lady Beatrice met his gaze. "No, I despise your wife, but I am not a murderer." "That is not what I have heard," Mrs. Cross said quietly. Lady Beatrice went white. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that Margaret's death was never properly investigated," Mrs. Cross said. "I mean that I have kept my suspicions to myself for 20 years, but if Eleanor is in danger, I will not keep silent any longer." The accusation hung in the air, thick as smoke. Lady Beatrice rose slowly from her chair. "How dare you?" she said. "You are a guest in this house, and you speak of murder as if it were gossip at a tea table. I loved my brother's wife. I mourned her death. I will not be accused by a scheming widow with a grudge." "A grudge?" Mrs. Cross laughed bitterly. "You destroyed Margaret. You poisoned her slowly with cruelty and lies. And when that was not enough, you used other means. I have no proof, but I have no doubt. And neither does Alexander." Lady Beatrice turned to Alexander. "You cannot believe this madness." Alexander's face was stone. "I believe that my mother died too young and too suddenly. I believe that you have spent 20 years trying to control this family. I believe that if you thought Eleanor threatened that control, you would stop at nothing." Lady Beatrice's composure shattered. "You are a fool," she said, "just like your father. He chose a woman who was not his equal, and she brought him nothing but grief. You have done the same. You will pay for it, and so will she." She swept from the room, her skirts trailing behind her like a dark tide. Eleanor stood by the window, her hands clenched at her sides. She felt the walls of the house pressing in, the weight of old secrets and old hatreds threatening to crush her. But she was not crushed. She had survived hunger and cold and the cruelty of strangers. She had survived a ballroom full of enemies. She would survive this. Alexander came to stand beside her. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I should have protected you better." "You protected me today," she said. "You saved my life." It would not have been in danger if not for me." She turned to face him. "Do not do this, Alexander. Do not push me away because you feel guilty. I will not allow it." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the full weight of his burden. "What if I cannot keep you safe? What if they win?" "Then we will have fought," she said, "and we will have been worth something. But I do not believe they will win, not while we stand together." He reached for her hand and held it tightly. "Together," he repeated. The word was a promise. In the cellar, the hired man sat in the dark and waited. He had done what he was paid to do, or tried. He did not care about the Duke or the Duchess or the old woman with her poison. He cared only about the money. But the money would not save him now. And in the shadows, a door opened. The confession came at dawn. The hired man, frightened by the prospect of the gallows, had agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. He named Percival Ashworth as the man who had paid him. Percival had promised £100 for Aline's death and hinted that more would follow if the Duke met with an unfortunate accident. Alexander listened to the magistrate's report with a face of ice. Then he ordered his carriage and rode to London, where Percival had fled in the night. Aline waited at Ravenmore Hall, packing the library floor as the hours crawled past. She had not slept. Fear had given way to a strange, hollow calm. Whatever happened now, the truth was out. The family's rot had been exposed. Alexander returned late that evening. He found Aline in the library, a book open on her lap unread. He stood in the doorway, his coat dusted with road grime, his face drawn. "It is done," he said. "Percival is in custody. He confessed to everything, the attack on you and his plans for me. He will stand trial." Aline rose and went to him. "And Lady Beatrice?" "She has fled to the continent. She will not return. Her name is destroyed." "And Lady Honoria?" "Her father has disavowed any knowledge of Percival's plans. There is no evidence against her, but the scandal will follow her for years. She has been sent to the country." Aline looked at him for a long moment. "It is over, then?" "It is over," Alexander said, then quietly. "But the cost has been high. I have lost what remained of my family." "You have lost nothing worth keeping," Aline said. "You have kept your honor, you have kept your name, and you have kept me." He smiled a small, tired smile. "Yes, I have kept you." The days that followed were strange and quiet. The house seemed larger without Lady Beatrice's presence, and the servants moved with a new deference. Aline found herself with real authority for the first time. Mrs. Thatch, her loyalties shattered, had been dismissed. Rose was promoted to housekeeper. But the real change was between Aline and Alexander. They had survived a war together, and the bond forged in that struggle was stronger than any they could have imagined. They began to speak openly, sharing their fears and their hopes. They walked together in the garden where Aline had nearly died, and slowly the memory of that day began to lose its power. One evening, as autumn turned to winter, Alexander took Aline to the chapel where they had been married. The building was empty, lit only by candles. He led her to the altar and turned to face her. "I have something to say," he said, "something I should have said long ago." Aline's heart quickened. "What is it?" "When I came to you in Cheapside, I told you I needed a partner. I told you I needed someone I could trust. That was true, but it was not the whole truth." "What was the whole truth?" He took her hands. "I needed you. I did not know it then, but I needed you. Not as a weapon or a shield, not as a means to an end. I needed you because you are the only person who has ever seen me as a man, not a title. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." The words echoed in the quiet chapel. Aline felt tears rise, and this time she did not push them away. "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you for longer than I was willing to admit." He kissed her then, and it was not a kiss of desperation or fear. It was a kiss of promise, of beginning, of a future finally claimed. They stood together at the altar, their hands intertwined, the candles casting golden light over their faces. The storm had passed. The war was won. But there was one more surprise to come. A month later, Elinor discovered she was with child. The news transformed the household. Servants smiled openly. The rector offered prayers. Mrs. Cross returned to stay, her eyes bright with tears. An heir, she said. Margaret would be so proud. Elinor felt the weight of the words. She was carrying the next Duke of Ravenmore. The child would be born into a family that had tried to destroy her, but she would shape that family into something new. Alexander was beside himself with joy. He was tender and attentive, a man transformed by the prospect of fatherhood. He spoke often of the future, of the estate, of the legacy they would build together. On the night before their first wedding anniversary, they sat in the drawing room, the fire crackling. Elinor rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, her hand on the swell of her belly. "I was thinking," she said, "of the day we met. You arrived in that black carriage, so stern and so certain. I thought you were the most terrifying man I had ever seen. And now I think you are the best thing that ever happened to me." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I was certain I was making a logical choice, a woman of character, a woman who would not be corrupted by this world. What I found was so much more." "What did you find?" "A woman who fought for me. A woman who stood before a ballroom of enemies and did not flinch. A woman who made me believe that I could be more than the sum of my burdens." Elinor smiled. "You have always been more. You simply needed someone to see it." The fire burned low. The house was quiet. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the grounds of Ravenmore Hall in a blanket of white. Elinor closed her eyes and listened to the sound of Alexander's heartbeat, steady and strong. She had been an orphan with no name and no future. Now she was a duchess, a wife, a mother-to-be. She had faced the laughter of a family that despised her, and she had survived. They had stopped smiling after the wedding. But Elinor had never stopped hopping, and now, at last, her hope had become her life. The story of the Rag Duchess was over. The story of Elinor Ashworth, Duchess of Ravenmore, had only just begun.